Hey, what's going on, guys? My name's Chris. Welcome back to episode 7 of the Ascendancy podcast.
Austin here.
I'm here with Austin, and today we're really excited for this episode. We've been brainstorming this for a while and preparing, and we're going to be talking about the topic of single-issue campaigns in the vegan movement and just the activism movement in general. Before we get into that, I think it's poignant for each of us to talk a little bit about ourselves, our principles, our vision in terms of activism and the styles of activism that we do and that we, advocate for. So me personally, I was very influenced by a well-known activist named Gary Yourofsky. I viewed his speech and I looked at a lot of his work when I first went vegan, and he had a huge impact on just the way I view this issue, the way I see the path forward toward a vegan world. And pretty much I'm an abolitionist, so I reject all animal exploitation on its face completely. And I think it's really important with regard to my activism to focus on uprooting speciesism, getting humans to look at their human supremacist mindset in the mirror and to reject that. And I feel like that's really the only path that we can take toward a vegan world where all animals are respected and their lives are, respected and such. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Austin. If you could share a little bit about your, perspective on activism, your principles, where you come from.
Absolutely. I'm an abolitionist too, and I was very fortunate. My introduction to veganism was also through Gary Yourofsky and James Wildman. And I share the same perspective that we should abolish all animal exploitation. And I think that activism should really reflect this as well. I mean, if we think back to instances of historical injustices that humans faced, and there are very many of them, but an overarching theme is that exploiting, preying on our fellow man is immoral, and there's no right way to go about it. And in the same way, I don't see any difference that animals possess, any characteristic that they possess that makes it morally acceptable to exploit them, to view them as a resource or a commodity, where the same wouldn't hold true of our fellow human. So that's why I hold that perspective. I think there is one attribute most of all that makes a a sentient being worthy of moral consideration, and that is, sentience, or perhaps a potential for sentience as well. But yeah, that's my thoughts on that. So I'd like to see activism reflect this. And our topic today, of course, is single issue campaigns or single issue activism. Chris, would you like to define that and share your thoughts on it and why people might be interested in doing it?
Yeah, so single issue campaigning, single issue activism, the way I define it is basically singling out a specific industry, a specific group of animals that are being exploited and preyed upon by humans, and doing work, within a coalition of other activists, organizing, protest disruptions, ways to basically try to eradicate the specific form of animal exploitation, a specific industry. And, some examples that I've seen include, foie gras protests. If you don't know what foie gras is, it's basically a delicacy, interpreted as a delicacy, obviously not to myself, but basically humans force feed ducks until their livers become like grossly enlarged and pretty much diseased, basically in my understanding. And basically their liver becomes like a delicacy to certain people. It becomes a certain, flavor or whatever. So every day, every week, that those ducks are being exploited, they're being force fed by a tube to just grossly enlarge their organs. It's pretty fucked up, of course, along with, all the other industries that exploit animals. But some of the footage for this is definitely pretty hard to watch, and it's just horrible what humans will do to other animals for selfishness, for greed. Other examples include, fur protests, protesting using, coyote skins or protesting, mink fur, these designer outlets like Marc Jacobs and, Gucci and whatnot, using these animal skins, these animal coats for nothing but, vanity goods, sweaters and jackets and things like that. It also involves other things, protesting SeaWorld, keeping like dolphins and orcas in captivity. It also involves, maybe a circus protest. If a circus opens up in your area or, in a local, vicinity, activists come together to protest that specific, circus. And that's what it is. It's right in the definition of the episode. It's a single issue. So you're targeting out a specific industry, a specific practice, revolved around, certain animals, and you're working to try to abolish that. So I thought about this, from a lot of perspectives, and to, kind of steelman it, if you will, I kind of can see where activists are coming from when they engage in this kind of activism. It's like there's these, practices that are maybe a little bit more on the fringe that maybe, most people, most non-vegans would say they're against, for example, the fur trade or, abusing animals in circuses. They kind of view it as low-hanging fruit, so to speak. I've heard this phrase used often, where it's like we can work together to abolish this one practice, and it has a tangible, effect that really feels like we've made an impact. We've been able to, stop this industry from existing, to stop these animals from being exploited, specifically a certain group of animals. And it feels like it's a lot more tangible, like I said, because you're able to see real-time consequences of your efforts. And that might be, it's different than something else where it's, if you're maybe leafleting on the street or you're doing outreach with, 10, 20, 30, 40 people a day. If you're doing, a different activism event, you don't know the consequences of, those conversations. So with something like this, it seems like there's a real world tangible effect, and you feel like you're actually making a difference for a specific group of animals. So if there's anything I left out, Austin, you could pitch in, share your thoughts on like why people might do single issue campaigning.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think it really appeals to people on an emotional basis. Like, there's animal exploitation happening all over the world. So, an individual vegan or vegan activist could come face to face with a specific type of injustice in their backyard. So, that could motivate them to take action to do something about that specific thing. Additionally, gets a lot of media coverage. People make a really big deal about these campaigns. So that could also influence people to take action into pursuing them specifically, because of course there's a perspective or an idea among a lot of activists that veganism is sort of a hard sell, and that these things are easier sell and they have more mass appeal. So we should basically go with the flow and do these things that have a lot of mass appeal. We can see a tangible result quickly rather than say in the longer term. And I think these things just give people that feedback that they really like and that they look for in activism, that really just meshes with people's tendency to prioritize short-term gratification. But moving on from there, what do you personally view as the pitfalls of it? How do you think it could be improved, and what do you think is a viable alternative to it?
Yeah, so this part I'll kind of get back to you after a little bit. So, as I explained, there's definitely reasons why activists engage in this kind of activism, and there's, certain things they see that can come from it. But a few issues I have, first one is just that it doesn't align with my principles personally. That's why I don't really see myself doing single issue activism ever again. I remember when I was a new vegan, I did engage in some type of like McDonald's protest after the animal rights conference, which was down in the DC area. And, I just obviously hadn't been a seasoned vegan like I am now, where I've thought about this. So it doesn't align with my principles. You know, I'm an abolitionist, so when it comes to doing single issue activism, it's not getting to the root of the issue. It's not challenging human supremacy. It's not challenging speciesism. It's just basically using pressure, peer pressure campaigns to get industries to get corporations really to change their, you know, procedures, to change their paperwork, you know, just to, you know, not deal with these pesky activists always on their property with their signs hooting and hollering. It just doesn't get to the root of the issue. You know, I really see a long-term vision with getting to a vegan world, and even if, you know, I might not see short-term, you know, wins right away, I know that I'm making an important effort that can cause, you know, significant change down the line, you know, well beyond my lifetime. So that's the first reason. It just doesn't align with my principles. It doesn't get to the root of the issue. There isn't necessarily a education component on getting people to reject speciesism entirely, because you're only focusing on one group of animals. It's like, instead of focusing on all animals, you're just kind of honing in on this specific industry, this specific group of animals, you know, in the non-vegans who are, you know, looking at your protest, and the non-vegans that are seeing your stuff on social media. You're not really making clear the vegan stance that all animal exploitation must be rejected on its face, and it just doesn't get to the root of the issue. Like I said, what are some issues that you see with single issue activism?
One major one is because it doesn't address the core of the issue, which is that animal exploitation should end, or animals shouldn't be exploited. People can think that they're doing enough. So let's say someone rejects foie gras, but then they still think, oh, hey, these vegans are protesting this foie gras, and hey, I'm on board with that. That's like a really cruel thing. But I'm going to go in the restaurant now and order a steak or chicken or fish or some other animal that they're going to then consume. So I see it sort of as like a missed opportunity. And it can create this perspective among non-vegans that because they're agreeing with this specific message, that they're on board with what vegan activists are saying. So they can feel like they're potentially doing enough, and they could maybe even be hostile to the message down the road. I've experienced this personally a lot in doing vegan activism, online, in person, everywhere, is that non-vegans will say, well, I'm against XYZ, I don't go to the zoos, I reject, you know, all of these different forms of injustice to animals, so why don't you redirect your message to someone who's doing less than me? And because they don't understand the core of the issue, that exploiting animals itself is an injustice, they basically just swap out one injustice for another. Instead of wearing a fur coat or a fur trim coat, they wear a leather coat. Instead of consuming foie gras, they consume steak or chicken or something like this. Instead of going to a circus, maybe they'll go to a zoo. It's like, because it doesn't get to the core of the issue, people can always find another way to exploit and objectify animals. I think right now we're at a really, really crucial time for animal rights. If you look on like various sources online, I've seen the same statistic for 8 years now, that 1% of the world is vegan. I think it's quite a bit less than that, but either way, we're a really small number of people, and we can have a disproportionately large impact, and we do by doing activism. I think right now it's a crucial time to get other people to be vegan and to educate them what it actually means to be vegan. And this is a rejection of all animal exploitation. And from there, they can become an activist. And I've heard this saying, this like catchphrase over and over again from non-vegans. It's like, it's better to have 10,000 imperfect vegans or non-vegans versus one perfect vegan. I hear this a lot. And I don't think that getting people to be imperfect vegans is more difficult than getting people to actually be vegan. It's just a matter of trying, of educating people. Like when you put out this message that, hey, you reject this foie gras or XYZ, you're doing enough, you're missing this opportunity to educate them into being vegan. And I've done vegan activism for over 6 years now with Anonymous for the Voiceless, and I've seen many people's eyes open on this subject and say that they're going to become vegan or become activists or even join in the cube later on at later cubes. I've seen people go from non-vegan to vegan activists. And if in those situations people had a single issue campaign, that would have never even potentially come about. So I just view there to be huge importance in getting people educated on what veganism really is and giving them the opportunity to go from being vegan to a vegan activist. And they're only going to have that potential if they understand what veganism really is. So, Chris, what are your thoughts on that, and what do you think are other potential pitfalls of single issue campaigns?
Yeah, so I think you did a really good job explaining some of the pitfalls that, I've also thought about myself. Especially the comment about like reinforcing, certain non-vegans lifestyles to think like, oh, I'm already doing enough. Like I'm already rejecting this specific practice that the vegans are talking and shouting about. And it kind of brings to mind this one example. I saw a reel on Instagram the other day of an activist filming outside a foie gras protest, and some passenger came by in their vehicle and came up to the guy and was like, "Hey, we're not going to eat there anymore. We're going somewhere else." And then the activist gave him, a fist bump, like that was like some major win or something. And it's obviously not in my book. Like they've not been, edified on the subject. They're just going to go to some other establishment and pay for a different animal to be exploited and have their head chopped off in a slaughterhouse. So it's like I don't see that as a win. You're making people who, view that kind of protest to think like, for example, if it's a fur protest, they might think like, oh, okay, just not buying like, fox fur is bad, but like they're not protesting leather jackets or leather boots. So, what's the big deal? I'm just going to be like, okay, I won't buy fur because they're so mad and upset about that. But I'll just buy a different kind of animal commodity product. I'll just buy a leather jacket. I'll just go to this other establishment and eat chicken parmesan instead of like foie gras, or I'll eat some other animal dish. So, like you said, it just kind of could make people just completely even more entrenched in their lifestyle. They might think I'm doing enough. I'm rejecting this specific like awful practice that the vegans were so riled up about. Why do I have to go to these extra lengths? These cows and chickens, they must be humanely slaughtered, right? They're not so angry about that. They're only specifically, targeting foie gras as being so bad. So, like you said, it could entrench people more in their lifestyles and make them more hesitant, more willing to, reject further change. And, kind of interrelated to that is the concept of like transfer dollars. So if you eradicate foie gras from a specific, retailer's menu, a specific, hotel chain restaurant's menu, that, supplier, ideally, like if I'm steel manning it, if we can get them to go out of business and they can no longer farm ducks for foie gras, well, if you look at the concept of transfer dollars, those consumers who would have ate foie gras, they may just go ahead and eat more chicken. They might just eat more steak. They might get more dairy products. So it's kind of like, what are we doing here? We could just be going around in circles because we're not addressing the root of the problem. We're not educating them about speciesism, educating them about, human supremacy, rejecting the notion that we can exploit animals. They're just going to transfer their dollars to another industry where animals are exploited. And it's like, yeah, it seems like you got this great win by getting this product off the menu, this specific, fur product banned from the store, but what are the consumers going to do instead? Are they going to become vegan? No, you didn't talk about veganism at all. They're just going to probably go buy a different animal commodity product. So it's like, what are we really achieving here? Like, it seems like we've won, but in the net, it may just lead to other animals being bred and slaughtered more, in a different industry. And I think that's something really important to think about. These are more kind of like high level, like further out thoughts to think, compared to the simplicity of like a protest. We're going to ban this item. This is going to be amazing. This is going to be great when this this industry is gone. But when you think about it high level and you project out the consequences, is this really having like a good effect? Is this really getting us closer to that vegan world where, the majority of humans reject animal exploitation? I'm not convinced that it does that, and that's definitely a part of the reason why I don't participate in single issue activism. And I think that's most of my thoughts on the pitfalls. But we do want to include in this episode ways to make this kind of activism more effective, to improve it. Our perspectives on making this better. Upgrading the firmware, so to speak. So I'll bring it over to you, Austin. What are some things you think activists can do and implement to improve this kind of activism to maybe make it more holistic and vision?
Absolutely. There are instances of animal exploitation everywhere, close to where people live, in their locality, and I think that's really what creates this opportunity to do single issue activism campaigns, and that's why people do it. Typically, these are things that happen in their own backyard, so they want to speak out against it because they see it regularly. I see these situations as opportunities to spread the vegan message and to educate people on how all of these different types of animal exploitation are interlinked. So let's say there's something local to you like a rodeo or a circus or any sort of event or venue that exploits animals in an unusual way that puts this place on the map as somewhere that does this low-hanging fruit of animal exploitation we can combat. I would say go out there and educate people rather than just protest. I would say take that as an opportunity to educate and do try to get this specific thing ended. But when you go out there, rather than just holding signs, talk to people, educate them on the problem, educate them that there is no right way to exploit animals, there is no right way to wear animals or to eat animals or to enslave animals or to view them as an object to be consumed or as a resource. I think one way to potentially do that is use a model of Anonymous for the Voiceless. Go out, hold the screens, show the reality of various types of animal exploitation. Maybe have someone who has a screen of a specific practice too, and explain how these things are interlinked. When you get people and they stop and they look at the screens, this creates an opportunity to educate. And I think in this initial interaction, it's really important to tell people quickly what the core of the problem is, because I think if we look at the vision in the long term, the objective should be how can we get as many people right now to understand the problem, understand what veganism actually is, and give them a pathway to become vegan and to become effective activists who themselves relay the problem in an articulate, in a correct way that does justice for the animals. But I don't want people personally to shy away from doing activism or in protest of these specific things, but I want them to tie everything together. I want people to show how all of these things are interrelated, and I think this will have a much more significant impact in not only ending these cruel industries in the short term, but also educating people to have that long-term effect. And Chris, what's your perspective on that? How do you think it could potentially be refined to be more effective?
Yeah, that's really well said. And I think, most of what you said covered what I was going to bring up. I think that's the best way we can improve this kind of activism, if you're going to engage in it, is just make it more holistic, make it more inclusive of an abolitionist approach, get to the root of the issue. It's important to educate consumers about animal exploitation and that the only reason you see this goose being force fed, you see this fox being skinned, is because humans think animals are here for us to use, that they're resources, that we have every right to exploit them, commodify them, objectify them, and slaughter them to create whatever ends we desire. As long as humans have that mindset, we're going to see this happen and continue. So it's really important to make these forms of activism inclusive of this general vision and make it interlinked, as you said. Connect this to the broader context of animal exploitation, in general, so people really get the picture. Because if you frame these as like single events of extreme cruelty, then people will just go on about their life thinking the eggs are humane, the steak in the store is humane, it's RSPCA certified, it's welfare approved. It's like this is a really special opportunity to bring in that interest from the public, because they're like, oh, this seems really bad. Let me support these guys, donate to them, and try to get this industry banned. Like that's a really important opportunity to edify that individual and to get them to understand veganism and hopefully go vegan themselves. So for example, if I'm looking at a single issue protest that's trying to ban horse carriages in your city, unfortunately, like here in Charlotte, I've seen horse carriages become like here and there around the city. So if you're going to do that kind of single issue activism, it should be inclusive of all around vegan message that animals aren't here for transportation. They don't exist to just transport us around the city. You have your own goddamn legs, you better fucking use them. So instead of just specifically honing in on the horse issue, you make it inclusive of a general vegan vegan message, vegan movement. And when it comes to a foie gras protest, you can include footage of other animals being exploited and killed for chicken, for steak, for dairy, for pig flesh, all and on. So I think that's ways that we can make this like a bigger conversation and can have more of a lasting change, because we have to emphasize education, education, education. Like that's super important. That's something Gary Yourofsky, who's served as a mentor for myself and who's inspired Austin as well. That was a big focus for him, is just educate, get to the root of the problem, and challenge the human supremacist mindset that allows this exploitation to occur. If we just focus on single issue and try to get this industry banned, we'll just be going around in circles for centuries because we're not getting to the root of the problem. We eradicate one horrific industry that exploits animals in a specific way, another one is just going to prop up in its place because you're not actually getting consumers, you're getting fellow humans to understand that this is wrong, that we shouldn't be using animals for our purposes. So those are like some of my thoughts on how we can improve this and just make it inclusive of a all around abolitionist message that animals aren't here for us to use for any purpose. So yeah.
Yeah, well said. In closing this off, I just want to reflect on one thing. I see many posts on social media that I look at them and I think, oh wow, this is like a vegan post. I see like a clip of SeaWorld or something, and I see all of these comments of people who are against, putting this whale, or this orca whale, I should say, in this exhibit, having them swim in circles. And I just imagine these people who are probably sitting down, maybe eating a burger, wearing leather, just exploiting animals in so many ways, talking about these subjects, acting like they're on the side of the animals while animals are literally in their guts, rotting, or they're exploiting and harming animals in so many various other ways. And I just think, it's just such a missed opportunity to just let that go by, to just let that slide, and to just let people think that if they reject one form of cruelty, all of the other things they do are acceptable. And it almost further entrenches them into this ideology that think if they reject this, then they're doing enough. And I really don't want to see that. This is such a crucial time for the vegan movement. I really want people to be well educated on this and have the opportunity to become activists themselves. But yeah, that's my closing remark. Chris, anything you want to add?
Yeah, that was a really good statement there. And I want to say, we're open to dialogue. If you disagree with us, if you have, any contentions with our points, we'd be more than happy to engage with that. You can just drop a comment down below. We do read all the comments. Obviously there's so many to get through being a young and early podcast. So yeah, we will engage with you. We're not afraid to talk about this, and potentially in the future even have guests on who want to have a little debate about certain things. We're happy to do that. So yeah, stay in touch, and we appreciate you guys for tuning in, and stick around for the next one. Peace out.
Peace.